I
And there's
believe we
Florence.
have quorum.
Yes.
Okay, I can go ahead and get us started and hopefully members can join as they're available. Um, yeah, if you don't already know, my name's Camille Randolph. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an equity analyst at Caltrans in the Director's Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs. Um, And yeah, I can go ahead and start by kicking this meeting off to Justin to go ahead and call roll and also lead us through the virtual meeting process.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Camille. Begin by calling the roll. Carrie Akimi Hernandez.
Here.
Abamel Chavez Hernandez.
Here.
Naomi Iwasaki.
Here.
Lawrence Simon.
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum. I'll jump into our webinar logistics. Welcome everyone to the June 17th, 2025 Interagency Transportation Equity Advisory Subcommittee meeting on data implementation. This subcommittee's focus will be on elevating diverse and historically marginalized voices and will advise the California Transportation Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and California Department of Transportation on how to achieve meaningful outcomes in transportation equity, environmental justice, and equitable economic opportunities, especially as related to transportation planning and programming. The meeting agenda is located on the Commission's website at www.catc.ca.gov. Any document created for this committee can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at transportationeac@dot.ca.gov and we'll have them returned as quickly as possible. American Sign Language translation is being provided for this meeting. You should see them on your screen. Live closed captioning is also available. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose. Speakers, for accessibility purposes, we ask that you please state your name prior to speaking. Presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. Please remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our translating services adequate time for accurate translations. And for the members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as a part of each item at this meeting. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of the screen. There you'll find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. Encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as we reach an item to give the system time to acknowledge you. And staff will let you know when it's your turn to comment. You may also use the Q&A tab to submit your comment, and staff will read the comment on your behalf. Do your best to be concise, and we ask you to make your point in 3 minutes or less. And if for some reason we have many speakers on a topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Justin. I'll now lead us in our land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the land we now call California is the ancestral land of the over 109 nations, tribes, and peoples. The indigenous peoples of this area have a deep reciprocal relationship with the land as its original stewards. Their ways, methods, and traditions have contributed to California's rich biodiversity and have impacted the transportation network for the state. We stand with Indigenous communities and are committed to partnering and advocating for a more equitable and sustainable future. Our transportation network not only connects us to families, friends, work, and leisure, it connects us to our past and future. We embrace our past with a future commitment to inclusiveness and equity for everyone who calls the state home. We'll now take public comment for items not on the agenda. Clerk, is there anyone looking to make public comment?
Thank you. Not seeing any request to comment at this time.
Okay, great. So now we'll move into the election of chairs. So with the creation of ad hoc subcommittees, there's now an opportunity for additional EAC members to take on a leadership role if interested. So a subcommittee chair would be responsible for facilitating subcommittee meetings and working with staff on developing the meeting agendas, and also reporting out at each full EAC meeting on the activities of the subcommittee and introducing any recommendations or actions that the subcommittee would like the full EAC to consider. As this is the first meeting of the data subcommittee, we'd like to provide folks with the opportunity to nominate themselves or a colleague to serve as the chair of this data subcommittee. With that, at this time, I'll open the floor for nominations of the Data Implementation Subcommittee Chair.
If there are no other interested candidates, I'm happy to nominate myself. This is Naomi Iwasaki.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Is there anybody else? Okay, seeing none. We have Naomi Iwasaki nominated as chair. May I have a motion, or may I have a second to the motion to nominate Naomi as the subcommittee chair?
Second.
Seconded by Florence. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, great. Parker, is there any public comment on this item?
Not seeing any requests from the public to comment.
Thank you. Clerk, could you please conduct a roll call vote?
Will do. Thank you. Carrie Akimi Hernandez,
Yes.
Albamel Chavez Hernandez,
Yes.
Naomi Iwasaki,
Yes.
Florence Simon.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Awesome. Congratulations, Naomi, on being elected as chair of the Data Implementation Subcommittee. Okay. We'll now move into the presentation that will preview subcommittee advisory opportunities. Carolyn, would you like to kick us off?
Will do. Thanks, Camille. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Abrams, and I use she, they pronouns. I'm the Senior Advisor on Race and Equity in the Caltrans Director's Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs. And I wanted to use today's subcommittee meeting as an opportunity to preview the Caltrans Equity Index for you all. This will be one of the advisory opportunities where we really see this subcommittee being able to provide added value to the work that we're doing. And today's purpose is to cover the equity index. There isn't necessarily an actionable item on this quite yet, but just to set the tone for this presentation, eventually where we will be seeking your input is on the development of use cases. There are several use cases of the tool that are happening internally at the moment, some which would be useful to run past you all, and then others extending beyond the internal use of the tool. We'd be looking for your feedback and input on the use of EQI externally beyond Caltrans. So for today, I will give you an overview of the tool. Some folks might already be familiar with it. Others, this might be new information. But we can talk a little bit about use cases and then talk about some of the additional work that this subcommittee could take on as the year goes on. So that being said, just to give you a little bit of background, as I mentioned, I'm with the Director's Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs. And one of the things that our office is charged with is the development and implementation of different equity initiatives and strategies department-wide. And one of those current efforts over the past few years and for the foreseeable future will be the development and the launch of the Caltrans Equity Index, otherwise most commonly known as the EQI. So I'll spend some time today covering what the tool is. Next slide. All right, so the EQI is basically a spatial screening tool, very similar to some of these other mapping platforms that are out there, such as CalEnviroScreen or Healthy Places Index. This tool is designed to recognize transportation inequities. And what we think is more novel about this tool is that it is done so at a very granular level. So we are looking at census blocks, not census tracts. So when it comes to transportation, this is really critical since transportation takes place at a very granular level and impacts people basically at a neighborhood scale. So the EQI really integrates both transportation indicators and socioeconomic indicators, and this helps us identify what we refer to as transportation-based priority populations. I'll go over this in the next slide, but to preview it for you all as I talk through the objectives, this tool has several layers in the screen. So you can look at some of these transportation indicators focused on access and focused on traffic burden and things like that. And ultimately also looking at the areas that are most impacted by our transportation system. And those are the transportation-based priority populations, as we refer to them. So the EQI has three main objectives. First and foremost, it is intended to identify indicators to account for equity-based outcomes in the work that we do. It is also intended to develop a data-driven definition of transportation-based priority populations. And finally, it's intended to evaluate and prioritize transportation plans and projects. So again, very specific to Caltrans, but could have a wide application beyond the department as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned briefly, the EQI includes a couple different groups of indicators. These primarily are grouped as demographic indicators, traffic exposure indicators, and access to destinations indicators. So you'll see for demographics, this includes household income and tribal land status. And this is basically going to be the baseline layer of the entire tool. So by looking at low-income populations and accounting for regional definitions of what low income means, and then also looking at tribal land status, we can see the areas throughout the state that are often the most underserved or marginalized. And then when it comes to the traffic exposure indicators, this includes truck-weighted traffic proximity and volume. It also includes crash exposure. So when this is combined with that demographic layer, looking at these underserved communities, this provides a measure for the areas across the state that are basically experiencing the greatest burden from our transportation system.
So is crash exposure just crash density, Carolyn? Oh, sorry, so, I should have raised my hand. My bad.
Okay, yeah. So I can provide the technical breakdown of what all of these different how these different indicators are measured. But basically, crash exposure has a radius. I believe there's a buffer of like 500 meters around where crashes happen. And rather than it being a rate, I believe it's just static because rates will always be adjusted, of course. So even as they're declining, it doesn't represent what's actually happening. So I can drop some additional details with our technical documentation for folks to review if you want to look at how some of these things are specific.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for jumping ahead of my committee.
No, that's okay. Martha, I see you also have your hand up, and then Naomi.
I just wanted to ask you, I know that crashes are important, but do you have any way of mitigating near misses or being able to record those near misses or incidents that potentially have happened? Because many times we count the actual accidents, but I think that there's some weight to be said about near misses because it shows that the propensity is far greater than what is just actualized. And that in turn is something that has a lot of merit in looking at the safety of those given corridors.
Yeah, it's a great point, and this tool does not account for near misses. It is one of the limitations of the tool, just because that would be more difficult to measure and represent. But that's a perfect example of how we're looking for ways, in addition to this tool, to supplement the information that is used to inform not only our planning processes, but other hazards and things like that that we recognize are absolutely a burden and a risk to the communities. So it is a limitation, but it's not captured in this version of the tool. And Naomi, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. And sorry if you're going to send these details out later, but just wanted to clarify if it's any and all crashes with any and all modes, or if there's any weight to crashes that result in fatalities or serious injuries, especially to people riding bikes or walking.
Yeah, so the EQI crash exposure indicator considers crashes that result in both injuries and fatalities, but no property damage crashes are included. So those ones are filtered out. And then I will also add that for the crashes, they are weighted by the highest level of injury for each crash. So that's taken into account as well. So a fatality would be weighted higher than a severe injury, which is weighted more than a minor injury.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. I will keep going. If folks have questions, by all means, raise your hand, and then we'll also have some time at the end where I can answer questions as well. Okay, so that takes us to the access to destinations indicators. And these measure multimodal access to destinations, which includes transit, bicycle, and pedestrian access. And essentially, this is going to measure the areas with the greatest gaps in access. So again, similar to how the traffic exposure indicators account for the greatest burden of our transportation system, the access to destinations indicators account for areas that are not receiving the benefits of our transportation system. I'll leave it at that, and then we can always talk a little bit more detail at the end if folks have more questions. And keep in mind, this is a high-level overview. We are happy to provide a more technical, in-depth tutorial on the tool, but we didn't want to preview that too early on before we start asking for your advisory input on certain things. So for now, we'll do a high-level overview. Next slide, please. Okay, so as it currently stands, we have the EQI web map, which is, you'll see a screenshot here on the slide. And this is sort of our flagship product, one might say, at the moment. And within the web map, you'll see that there are icons where you can access more information on the EQI, links to other resources, and our technical documentation. On the far right-hand side, you have the option to toggle on and off some of the individual screens, those screens being the transportation-based priority populations, the traffic exposure screen, the access to destination screen, and then our baseline demographic overlay. And then the web map itself is interactive. So as you click on each census block, it will give you a breakdown of those different indicators, how they're measured, things like that. So you can zoom into any area. And if you all are curious, I'll make sure that you have the link to this tool. You can go explore it on your own, do a little, ground truthing for your own neighborhood and see if things check out. But the web map is definitely a good place to start interacting and playing around with that. And then the other thing that you'll see on our website is a story map. And this really walks folks through how the tool works. So if you are exploring the tool and something doesn't seem intuitive or you have some questions, there is a story map that provides a visual walkthrough of what options are available to you and how the tool actually works. So that's available as well. And then next slide, please. We have one other tool that has been developed, which I think is of value to folks if you want to check it out. So in addition to the web map, we also more recently developed an analytical tool. We've been pilot testing it and it is available. Some of our district staff are already using it, so we'd be happy to share it with folks. It's more intended for internal purposes, but again, we can explore the feasibility of, encouraging other folks to use it beyond Caltrans. Everything is easily made publicly available, and I believe if it's not already linked on our website, we're planning to link it. So we recognized, especially for Caltrans purposes, the web map itself only gives you a sense of what you're looking at, for each census block. However, if you are a planner and you are trying to consider some of these, inequities that or disparate impacts of your project early in the planning process, we wanted to make sure that there was a tool that is more usable, user-friendly, without having to have robust like data knowledge or things like that. So we put this analytical tool together for planners to use so that they could map out their project based off of the area that they're planning to cover and also the different project components that they might be incorporating. This could be everything from a bicycle lane to a curb cut to a freeway expansion. Those are all components that are captured in this analytical tool. And then basically this reduces the burden, like the technical burden that folks would be expected to have if they want to account for some of these equity considerations. And basically what this analytical tool will generate is a report for the user that measures their project and will give them directional feedback basically on different components and whether that's a positive improvement based off of the indicators captured in the EQI, a neutral impact, or a negative impact, and then some considerations to take into account based off of that. So some things are pretty straightforward. If you're adding a bike lane or some other complete streets components, generally those are going to have a positive impact. Other things like a freeway expansion will have a negative impact. Some things are going to be more neutral and will definitely be will require some local based like ground truthing to determine the impacts of that project. But this at least gives planners in the districts a more user-friendly tool to make sense of the data captured in the EQI. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I will just cover briefly some of the use cases that are already under development, and then talk a little bit about some of our ideas for what we would like this group to weigh in on. And I'm gonna start by saying that tentatively, we are planning to reconvene this subcommittee in August. If our team was not prepared at that point to bring a feasible use case to you all for feedback, we may push that meeting to November. We just want to make sure that your time is well spent and we're not meeting unless we actually have something for you all to weigh in on. So that being said, I think we're in a good place to bring something to you in August, and if not, in the fall. So the current use cases that are underway apply to the following programs and efforts that are listed on the screen, which include the Caltrans System Investment Strategy, often referred to as CSIS, transportation planning, and some of our complete streets efforts related to Senate Bill 960. So after we officially launched the EQI back in 2024, we shifted our focus to the next phase of work, which is really on integrating the tool into our different policies and processes at Caltrans. And one of the significant applications of this tool has been the use of EQI metrics in the Caltrans System Investment Strategy, or CSIS. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, CSIS is the investment framework that we use And it basically incorporates a data and performance-driven approach to guide our evaluation of projects and our prioritization for discretionary funding. That being said, CSIS now, with the use of EQI, includes several quantitative metrics, and some of the ones that were derived from EQI include the access to destinations metrics and the traffic burden metrics. So this has allowed us to improve that framework. It's also helped us improve our analysis of project impacts, particularly for underserved communities, and it's improved our transportation investment decisions. So that was our first focus as we rolled out the tool, and that has been successful so far. So that piece, that's the first one. And then the second one is more in progress at the moment, but we've been working to integrate the EQI into the early phases of project planning at Caltrans. So one aspect of this is the update to what we refer to in true wonky fashion, the Transportation Scoping Information Sheet, also known as TPSIS. But the reason this document is important is because it informs the development of projects early in the process. And with the EQI and integrating it into that process, we can start to account for some of these inequities or some of these disparate impacts of those projects before they're too far along to change anything. Related to this work, as I just mentioned, we do have the analytical tool that we are also getting out to planners so that they have that to, make sure they're thinking through some of these equity considerations. And then to support all of those efforts, what's really in development right now is a guidance document for planners to ensure that they know not only how to use the web map and the analytical tool, but some of these other limitations and other considerations that they should keep in mind when using the EQI. So that's the transportation planning use case as it stands right now. And then the third one that's under development is the integration of EQI with some of our complete streets work. And this is really specific to Senate Bill 960 right now. The EQI was written into Senate Bill 960. Basically, the short of it is that this is to ensure that we're conducting targeted outreach to the most underserved communities when we are planning projects that have complete streets components. So what we are working on so far is providing a standard definition of underserved communities. And what we've proposed is to use the demographic layer of the EQI as our underserved communities layer, and therefore having that data-driven definition. So this would include low-income communities, and it would also account for tribal land status. And then with that, we are also developing guidance for how people can use that definition to inform their targeted outreach, and also some of the other considerations that need to be kept in mind when doing community engagement, since EQI is not a community engagement tool by nature. So there are going to be some limitations, and we want to make sure that we direct folks to a number of different resources that they can use, such as CalEnviroScreen, Healthy Places Index, things like that, if they want to seek out additional data and information to inform their engagement. So there's that one. And then the last thing, which isn't on the screen, but some of you, since you've been working on SB1 and whether in your previous term or your current term have been involved in the SB1 work with the commission, I did want to just flag, you're probably aware, but EQI is included in the SB1 Transportation Equity Supplement, and it outlines potential indicators that can be used to basically identify what they refer to as disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized group. So that supplement, that equity supplement, is included in all of the Senate Bill 1 program guidelines as of August 2024. So EQI is offered as a resource for folks to use in their applications. Okay. With that, what I want to leave you all with, just some food for thought, and I welcome feedback and questions on it right now, but some of the potential areas where we are going to be seeking input from the members is around the user guide itself for EQI, Right now, this is intended to be an internal document for planners, folks within Caltrans that are using the tool, but there's no reason why it couldn't also be a publicly available document for anyone using the tool. And we would just make sure that we're clear on language around what's specific to Caltrans staff and what's specific to just a general user who might be looking at the EQI. So there's a user guide. And we're also thinking through the application of the tool beyond Caltrans. So think, grant applicants who are looking to document, status of things in their area, might be MPOs, RTPAs, other CBOs or community advocates, things like that. So thinking about ways that this tool could be useful and making sure that we're able to disseminate this information to folks. And then I think the final piece that we've been sort of brainstorming is considerations for how this tool could inform community engagement. And that being said, the full recognition that this is not a community engagement tool. So there are going to be substantial limitations, but we also recognize that folks might start with this tool. And we want to be really very clear with folks how it could be a starting place, and then what other tools and resources they might need to consider to support their engagement. So gonna pause there and take any questions on that or any questions on the tool. And then I'll just let folks know that as we continue to plan for the next subcommittee meeting, and now that we have a chair, we can work to figure out the priority of these advisory opportunities. And Carrie, yes, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is really helpful. I wanted to know if the data could possibly be shared with ESRI for a GSI, GS mapping tool, to have a layer for communities to plug into. And then also wondering if there are ways to capture wildlife corridor issues. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, those are good considerations. I can talk to our data and equity policy advisor about whether there's been any conversation around including some of our data and sharing it with folks over at ESRI or ESRI, I think is, I often refer to it as ESRI, but either way, however folks refer to that. I know that we've been in conversation with the folks that developed and maintain CalEnviroscreen, and all of our data sets are publicly available and can be downloaded straight from our website. So it's definitely out there. Anybody could download the data for their own personal use, but I don't know if we've made a concerted effort to put that on the radar of some of these other larger platforms, but it would be something worth noting. And then as far as wildlife corridors, I can say for now, the tool definitely doesn't include that. However, that could be something that we want to either make sure is noted in the limitations of the tool, or see if, in future versions, if that's something that would make sense to capture, we could explore that. So this is version 1.0 of the tool also, I should say, and eventually new data sets will become available. Of course, we'll need to update those, but there is always a possibility of updating the methodology and releasing a version 2.0, et cetera, as the tool develops into the future.
Thank you for that.
No problem. Other questions or thoughts? And Camille, if you go to the next slide, oh, Naomi, go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't get to my hand button. Not so much on the ECI, but just curious if anyone from staff on the call can share at this point. I'm sorry if I missed it, but if there are any plans to update the indicators or the methodology, or develop supplementary methodology to support this type of data analysis.
Yeah, great question. So on our side, where things stand right now is that the data sets currently included in the EQI are reaching sort of their not their expiration, but there are now new data sets available. So those can immediately be plugged in, and we'll be working to make sure that those data sets are the most current. Ideally, those data sets are generally updated on an annual basis. So that's the cadence that you could typically expect for new data becoming available. As far as the methodology goes, our EQI team is currently in conversation about updating the methodology and just refining some of the indicators and how they're measured. So it's very possible that if we do move forward with a methodological update to the tool, we would do the methodological update with the data set update, so that the full update just happens at once. And then we would make sure that we are really clear that we are releasing a version 2.0 of the tool so that folks are aware of what changes have been made and what new data are available.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. And Carrie, I see your hand is up as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. I realized I had one other question. I wanted to know, for the census blocks, does that include community islands, like neighborhood islands that are basically like former redlined areas, and also unincorporated communities?
Yes, across the entire state, we have everything captured at the census block level. And if they are too small to have basically a data set attached to them specifically, and we have a census block group that we can pull from, we extrapolate data from the block group to the block level. So everything is captured. If you go through the web map, you can click on every single census block throughout the entire state.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm. And then on the screen, folks will see the link to our webpage for our work, which is where you can find the EQI, but I can also send a follow-up email to the members of this subcommittee with direct link to the web map, the story map, and the analytical tool, as well as our technical documentation. So if anybody enjoys some light reading, you can peruse the technical documentation and have a better sense of some of these indicators and how they're measured. Okay, so I will say, Naomi, we will be working with you as the chair as we sort of plan out the workload for this subcommittee and, prioritizing what should be brought to this group and when. And so we can think through the feasibility of bringing something back in August. And if we're not ready for input quite yet in August, we would plan for November. But this group can definitely expect to receive a more detailed technical presentation on this tool before we start asking you to weigh in on some of these other use cases, just so that you feel very familiar and oriented with the tool itself.
Sounds good. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Well, Camille, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Kirk, is there any public comment on this item?
Not seeing any requests at this time to comment from the public.
Thank you. That will now lead us into closing and next steps. So like Carolyn said, the team will work with Naomi for a report out of this discussion and next steps for bringing the EQI use cases and other data implementation initiatives to the Data Implementation Committee. We'll also make sure that minutes are available. Like Carolyn also mentioned, our next subcommittee meetings will possibly be in August, depending on EQI information available, or if not in November, but just while we have everybody here to gauge an availability for August. So are there any days of the week that we should try to avoid, or any preferred days when scheduling future subcommittee meetings?
I will be out the first week of August, that first full week.
I'll be out the first 2 full weeks.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you
Camille,
for, oh, sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
sorry, Camille, to interrupt. I am not available every third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If there's nothing else, thank you so much for a great discussion at the Data Implementation Subcommittee meeting, and congratulations again to Naomi. And that will bring our meeting adjourned at 3:44 p.m.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.